Okay, I have with me today Professor Chris Fitzpatrick. He is a consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist in the Coombe Women and Infants University Hospital. He's been involved in teaching undergraduate medical students since his employment as a consultant in 1996. We're going to get into his background a little bit more briefly, but I'm just going to say hello to Chris first, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to uh, give my views in relation to the case of Lucy Letby.
Absolutely, it's really my pleasure. Now, I was doing a little bit of research on you yesterday, and I discovered something I didn't know, which is that you're a board member of the IFRA Foundation, which is involved in an attempt to end female genital mutilation in Somalia by 2030, in association with the Somali Ministry for Women and Human Rights Development and the United Nations Population Fund. So I thought that was a fantastic thing, really. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that firstly.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, it's a real privilege for me to be involved with this campaign over the last number of years. I've been a board member for quite a while, and I've just recently exited my role as chair for 3 years. I'm still on the board. IFRA Foundation was set up by a woman called IFRA Ahmed, who came to Ireland many years ago when she was 17 years of age, and she had been a survivor of FGM. IFRA doesn't term herself as a victim. She is a kind of an activist and a survivor, and has concentrated her life on making changes in Somalia. So our work is predominantly in Somalia. We are an Irish-based charity. IFRA is a Irish Somali citizen, and we support her in relation to the work that she undertakes in Somalia to try and end FGM. And we work at both a grassroots level and also at the level of the state and federal legislatures in order to effect change. So it's a real privilege, particularly coming from an obstetrical background, to have had the opportunity to input into this kind of very worthwhile campaign. It's a very difficult problem in Somalia because the highest prevalence in the world is in Somalia, about 98%. And everything has adversely affected it, like political instability, climate change, population migration, etc. So, but anyway, we have had some notable gains in the last while with changes in federal and state legislation, and a growing movement at grassroots level to end this practice.
Absolutely, well, that's very, very worthy cause. So I really appreciate the fact you're involved with that. Let's talk a little bit as well about your background in obstetrics and
Yeah.
gynecology. So, would you like to, reflect on your own experience, your own career, and so forth? And a question I always like to ask is, what made you want to become involved in this field in the first place?
Well, I suppose it was my experience as a medical student assigned to the labor ward that kind of inspired me to take up obstetrics. And as you said, I was a consultant in the Coombe Hospital in Dublin, which is a large university teaching hospital, and worked there for 35 years almost. I'm now retired, so I retired over the last few years, but I'm still active at a teaching level. So I'm a clinical professor in University College Dublin. I'm involved in undergraduate teaching still, and I've enjoyed being able to actually keep up that commitment. In Dublin, there are three large maternity hospitals, all delivering between 7 to 8,000 babies a year. So it's quite a concentration of babies within a kind of a relatively small capital city. And I've had the experience of working in all three as part of my training. I also worked briefly in the UK, and I did a fellowship in America. For 7 years during that post as a consultant in the hospital, I also acted as the CEO. So there is a position in the Dublin Maternity Hospitals of master, which is a combination of a CEO post, a consultant, obstetrician and gynecologist, and also clinical director. So over that 7 years, I was responsible for just over 50,000 deliveries, mothers and babies. So it's a fantastic post with kind of an owner's responsibility, but has, I suppose, kind of provided me with kind of significant insights into how hospitals run, also a significant interest in risk management, systems analysis, etc. So I suppose when this case emerged in relation to Lucy Letby, having worked with neonatal nurses for like almost kind of a third of a century, I was immediately kind of drawn to the case and was horrified that something like this could happen, or that somebody in a caring profession looking after babies could do what she was accused of doing. And I suppose that immediately, drew me to the case, and kind of I followed it ever since, and it's been kind of well covered in the media here in Ireland as well.
Yeah. So you've written two articles actually for the Irish Times on this topic, and the first one was very much questioning whether this was a safe conviction. I think your view has become perhaps hardened, might be the word since then. And the
Yeah,
second,
I followed the case, and I suppose my immediate reaction was one of kind of horror, disgust, and then I was kind of a very a kind of disquieting feeling of seeing how it was portrayed in the tabloids in particular. So I suppose the image of Lucy Letby as kind of a cruel, heartless killer, headlines such as "Gates of Hell," and a photograph which kind of brought me back to photographs I'd seen of Myra Hindley. And and then I remember in particular the response of Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to the fact that she didn't actually attend her sentencing in court, and it was the feeling that kind of a generalized feeling amongst maybe the political establishment that she'd almost been brought in chains to actually hear her what she was to hear the sentence being passed down. And then I suppose afterwards, despite the fact that submissions to the Court of Appeal were kind of rejected, this kind of growing narrative that everything wasn't as it was portrayed, and kind of a very unsettling feeling that there was more to this case than maybe the very one-dimensional view that we got in the media. And I remember then reading the New Yorker article by Rachel Aviv back in early 24, where she kind of went through the case in great detail. And then I suppose kind of following on that, kind of almost a year later, then the report issued by the independent panel of very prestigious experts in relation to the 17 cases that actually had been the subject of the court case. And alongside that, I suppose the coverage in newspapers, and he must give credit to journalists also for going back and exploring what actually had happened. So I felt compelled as a clinician who had kind of worked with neonatal nurses, worked with babies, had responsibility for babies, maybe to say something about it back last year. And more, I suppose, given what I've read in the meanwhile, I am kind of more certain in my view that this conviction it represents kind of a gross miscarriage of justice, and there are so many holes in the case that one would hope that the momentum behind I suppose the campaign to quash the conviction or to retry the case actually results in something happening quickly. It brings me back also, I suppose, being Irish, I have memories of the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6, and there are similarities in terms of like a kind of a heinous miscarriage of justice. But I suppose the one major difference is that like there was a bombing campaign, there were crimes committed, but not by the Birmingham 6 and not by the Guildford 4. The case of Lucy Letby is very different in that there is a miscarriage of justice. There is an innocent person and there is no crime. So that makes it different. But some of the same maybe systemic kind of errors that pertain to the those cases I alluded to pertain to this. And when somebody is put in the frame in relation to something, and particularly in something that is kind of a very emotive case, whether it's mass murder as a result of a bombing, or the mass murder of children, it is very emotive, and so the imagery portrayed tends to fulfill your view of who these people are. I think, and others have drawn analogies. I think there's a case, Glenn Matthews has drawn this comparison between those cases and Lucy Letby. But I says the salient difference is that there is no crime, and I certainly believe strongly that case is very, very cogent, and has the backing of an international panel of experts, which, if they had been available at the original trial, we would not be actually having this conversation now. I suppose that is the tragedy, I suppose, of what has happened as well. I was very struck by, and I suppose the Netflix documentary has lots of flaws in relation to it, but I was struck in by the term kind of the horror unfolding. And I think there is a horror here. There's a horror, obviously, for the parents. And as somebody who's looked after mums and dads who've lost babies in the early neonatal period or stillborn, it is a hugely traumatic event. And in this case, it is compounded by everything that has happened. So my sympathies and my empathy goes to parents who are obviously kind of still in the throes of trying to deal with this, and I suppose the ever-changing narrative. And there is a horror. There is also a horror in relation to deaths that happen anyway. And then I suppose the conviction that somebody is in prison for something that they did not do, and how, as a committed healthcare professional who seems to be a highly motivated person who went and did training in kind of neonatal nursing, how one must feel accused of something that is so counterintuitive, that there's a horror for that person as well.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned the Netflix documentary
Yeah.
briefly. So we're going to get into the detail of the infants, some of the obstetric issues, and so forth.
Yes.
But I just wanted to ask you about that, seeing as you mention it. I know that you are critical of some aspects of that documentary. So could you speak?
Yeah, I think the voyeuristic nature, or the intrusive, I suppose the broadcasting of interviews and arrests, and I think that Lucy Letby's parents have commented on this. Like I did not expect to see that, and I was kind of shocked by seeing kind of police officers banging on doors, going upstairs into bedrooms. The accused in pajamas, kind of being handcuffed as though I don't know for what particular reason, at risk of flight or risk of whatever. But it seemed to me to be grossly voyeuristic, quite unsettling, and in terms of a documentary narrative, really unnecessary. But I suppose it did give an insight into I suppose policing, and how an investigation is conducted, and why police authorities would want, first of all, to do some of the things they did, but secondly also to make them available for a Netflix documentary, which is kind of, I suppose, it's Netflix is an entertainment channel now, and I know that it carries documentaries, but one feels uncomfortable kind of watching kind of documentaries that are so emotive on a channel that has kind of got real crime and also fictive crime kind of available on it. The use, I suppose, of digital recreation of voices and images, I suppose, kind of one is always suspicious of the use of AI, and although there was a kind of an alert as to the fact that this was being used, it does kind of sit a little bit uncomfortably with with a documentary. I think one is used to hearing kind of voices that are anonymized, but I think this it was perhaps maybe too artificial. But there were some interesting things that came across in the documentary, and I think that the chief prosecution witness, who also obviously volunteered to be a part of the interview, as was and this information had been made available before, so it was in the public domain. But I suppose to hear how he became involved in the case, as somebody who became involved in the police investigation, was reading the newspaper, who saw and having had experience as an expert witness before, and as a retired pediatrician, he felt that these are kind of cases that that he could get involved in. They were kind of they were something that he may have some expertise in. So that involvement in terms of selecting a person who would then become the chief prosecution witness, it was very transparent what happened. But I think one felt kind of uncomfortable in the selection process. Probably I suppose the two narratives in the documentary that affected me most was the narrative of the young mother who tragically lost a baby as a consequence of sepsis, and this case has been commented before by Dr. Xu Li, and it's in the independent report. But to hear, I suppose, kind of the woman tell the story herself of how she had kind of ruptured membranes, they were prolonged. She was in labor for a considerable period of time. She felt that things weren't going right. She had to advocate strongly to have a cesarean section performed. And then, the next thing that I suppose the next dramatic moment in this narrative is that she's been kind of wheeled up to the neonatal intensive care unit where the baby is being kind of resuscitated, or and is being made to resuscitate the baby, which fails. And I suppose the inexplicable nature of what happened, and then to find out that from the independent review that this was a woman who did not receive intrapartum antibiotics as a prophylaxis against infection, chorioamnionitis, infection of the womb causing infection of the baby. And not only that, but the baby received antibiotics in a delayed manner. So there was a gap before the baby received antibiotics. And so this was kind of a red flag. And I suppose it brings up issues in terms of obstetrics and there were a lot of issues in relation to the original trial, but the absence of any significant obstetrical or midwifery input to it certainly struck me as an obstetrician. And there are a number of cases. So that was certainly one case. There is a case where which is commented on by the independent review committee of a woman who had antiphospholipid syndrome, which is a prothrombotic condition. And it is the view of the panel that baby died as a consequence of thrombosis. There's no, I suppose, kind of a supplementary information as to how that condition may or may not have been treated during the course of pregnancy, maybe to obviate or minimize that risk. There is a case of hypoglycemia. And as a supplementary piece of information or a contributory piece of information, absence of obstetrical input because this baby had borderline growth retardation, which is a risk factor for hypoglycemia. And there are other factors as well. There is also the case of a traumatic delivery where a subcapsular hematoma it was kind of a significant cause in relation to mortality, and this I think the absence of a commentary in relation to the obstetric, the nature of the obstetric delivery. It was a rapid delivery. It was by cesarean section, and it was the review panel's consensus that this was kind of a traction or a shearing injury caused by delivery of the baby, and not a result of any kind of direct trauma to the thorax or to the abdomen. So that is unsettling, because the condition of a baby at birth is predicated by the condition of the baby during the course of the labor, and also by what happened during the pregnancy. And I think to have that additional supplementary information, which may contribute to an understanding of why unexpected collapses perhaps had other causes that were not adverted to. And so as an obstetrician, I was kind of particularly kind of interested in what that woman had to say, and the very, very tragic circumstance of what happened. I suppose the other comment in the Netflix documentary we're talking about was the comment made by the pediatrician towards the end of the documentary in relation to this tiny, tiny, tiny feeling of guilt that he may have in relation to the fact that they may have got the wrong person, which to me seemed to be, this was emblematic of a reluctance to look at the total picture. So, like these cases, in my view, Chris, the cases for which Lucy Letby was convicted of murder and attempted murder, these cases need to be put into a bigger context. So initially, I think that the chief prosecution witness looked at 32 cases, and about half of those, I think, then he felt were very suspicious. I think 17 cases went to trial. There were 25 cases plotted on this famous XY graph. They plotted kind of neonatal nurses on duty and unexpected events, unexpected collapses and deaths. And then there were the 11 cases, I think, that were brought by the police to the Crown Prosecution Service as a result of triaging over 4,000 cases that Lucy Letby may be involved in. So there are a number, there are different numbers and there are different cases, but there are cases that are outwith of the cases for which Lucy Letby was convicted. And I think they need to be looked at as well, because there is, I would feel, kind of information in those or themes in those that relate, that will help explain, I suppose, systematic failings that pertain to the cases for which he was convicted. But even in a global context, you know, and reading, and I suppose my information comes from reports I have read that, you know, that this hospital, like many hospitals, was experiencing difficulties, that there had been kind of increase in stillbirths recorded, and subsequent to the cases involved in Lucy Letby's case, there had been women who had, and this is on the obstetrical side, who seem to have had kind of, there seems to be an increased instance of unnecessary hysterectomies due to major obstetrical hemorrhage. On top of that, there were commentaries made by the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health who visited the hospital in relation to teamwork, in relation to also reluctance of juniors to ask for support, and maybe a reluctance of support being available for them. And this also was borne out in the Netflix documentary by a colleague of Lucy Letby, who spoke about a certain, what I would describe, toxicity in the hospital, that certain nurses didn't talk to some people, that there was kind of, there were visions in the hospital in relation just to how they socially got on. And also, I think a comment made to a junior nurse who was looking after kind of a baby with kind of high dependency needs, will kind of call as if the baby turns blue. So there is a global context in which this happened, and I suppose putting kind of a wider focus on it, like, and it's happened in other countries as well, that like there is kind of a crisis in maternity services and neonatal services, and I think like Jeremy Hunt kind of alluded to that, who had been the health secretary, that there have been a number of scandals and they've been well publicized. So it's kind of happened within a particular context, kind of a global context, within a hospital context. And then there are cases you could look at, which I suppose kind of begs the question as to how robust was the kind of basically the initial investigation, the clinical investigation, in terms of like kind of a root analysis in relation to why these things happened, uh, and 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 I suppose the the emergence of a single person as the causative factor, uh, and and then the fact that, like, I suppose the case itself, like to me there are two, and I'm not, I'm not obviously kind of a lawyer, but there seem to be kind of two strands to the prosecution case. The one, there was the scientific evidence that they argued proved irrefutably that babies were killed, or there was an attempt to kill babies. And then there was the circumstantial evidence, that Lucy Letby was the person. Now, I think the circumstantial evidence, doesn't stack up. And that was based, number one, on this very naive graph plotting critical incidents versus who was on duty. And I think kind of the Royal Statistical Society, eminent epidemiologists, biostatisticians who have been involved in overturning similar convictions made on similar naive assumptions, have proven that that graph which was used is statistically not valid. It doesn't stack up. It doesn't stand. I suppose the second piece of circumstantial evidence was the self-confessional kind of post-its and diary entries. And I think there's plenty of evidence that notes written by clinicians under duress, internalizing what has happened, blaming themselves, it is perfectly understandable how somebody, and maybe feeling isolated, demonized, why one might do this. The records that were taken home, which seemed to be like inadvertent or just carelessness, which happens, which occurs not uncommonly, that people take home ward lists used for handover inadvertently in their pockets, etc. That, at most is a misdemeanor, but it is not a proof of guilt in any circumstance. But then the scientific evidence. So basically, so the circumstantial evidence I would just leave aside because I think that is so weak. But the scientific evidence, the fact that the prosecution did not put in any expert witness to counter the arguments that were made, and that surprises me, and it surprises me also. And I say I'm not a lawyer, but I still imagine it is the responsibility of a judge where the scientific evidence is being used to prove that a murder has been committed, that some attempt will be made to request or to inquire, was there no credible evidence that could be given against this? And I know that there was an expert witness who was not called. So that seems to me to be very, very strange and disquieting. They also, and this is a commentary, and I'm basing it on what I read and what was recounted in the New Yorker article, that Chris, I just go back over that. Just
Yeah. Let's
it
it's
is
a bit of a technical issue there, but please continue.
yeah, it's recorded in the New Yorker article by Rachel Aviv that an instruction was given to the jury that they did not have to know the precise action which caused death in order to convict somebody of having committed murder or attempted murder. To me, like that that kind of undermines the scientific necessity to actually prove that these deaths were not due to, as the independent panel, I think, prove, to natural causes compounded by, you know, suboptimal care in some cases. So that instruction that you don't have to actually know precisely what happened to be satisfied in your own mind to actually think this person or is guilty, to me is very, very, very unsettling. And I suppose then, and this emerged in the New Yorker article, but also comes out also in the Netflix documentary, that information in relation to the impartiality of the evidence being given by the prosecution was questioned, and so and the judge being aware of that. Uh, and also, I suppose, it emerging kind of much later and recently, that a second expert witness who gave evidence in relation to laboratory investigations was himself under investigation at the time. So, in relation to his practice. So, the scientific evidence, the fact that no robust argument or defense was put up against that. The fact that there was an instruction that you really didn't need to know the precise act. It's almost an acceptance that, in fact, without any counter argument, that in fact murder had been committed, and then I suppose questions in relation to the quality of the expert witness testimonies, and in a sense, I would not seek to blame expert witnesses or to second guess the quality of their evidence, but it is the duty of the court, I think, to actually establish the robustness of that information by vigorous cross-examination and by counter argument. So I am surprised, and there were a number of consultant pediatricians who were called on to give evidence, and then a number of experts who gave their testimony on behalf of the prosecution in a really unbalanced, to me, unbalanced trial, and in a highly technical and complex narrative. How a jury would be expected to actually abstract the truth from that, without, as I say, counter argument, and perhaps, so that to me it is unsettling in relation to how the trial was conducted, and
I think
one would
it's.
only have wished
Can I
that.
just ask you a follow-up question? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, so you've cited the fact that the judge says, "Oh, you don't need to be bothering yourself with how these infants died," essentially, to paraphrase.
yeah.
So this is very specific. If you look across all the infants, there are very specific clinical signs. So it's a major problem, isn't it? The fact that
It's a major problem. It's a major problem because it almost takes the responsibility away from the jury to try and investigate themselves, uh, even as lay individuals, as to what might not have happened. So, and given the fact that like the scientific evidence is absolutely essential to the proof that a murder, attempted murder, has been or being not committed, to somehow undermine that or dismiss that, the detail of that, seems to me to be perhaps somewhat patronizing to a jury. Uh, and I would imagine if there had been, on the defense side, uh, a range of experts available, that a lot of what the judge accepted to be the case, and the jury accepted to be the case, would have actually have been significantly undermined, and in fact, I would argue, debunked during the course of the trial.
I agree, and I think do you think it's reasonable to infer that the fact these other cases were thrown out by the CPS is a reflection of that?
It is a reflection, and also I suppose their surprise at the fact that the cases were in fact the cases were thrown out. Uh, it does it does, I suppose, kind of emphasize the importance at looking to put a broader focus on the number of cases to find out, for I suppose the benefit of the hospital, for the benefit of parents, why in fact these events may have taken place. So, like, I think the Thirlwell inquiry starts with the premise that that Lucy Letby kind of attempted to murder and murdered kind of babies, and how could this possibly happen in a hospital? I think when the dust settles, and hopefully will settle soon, that there will need to be an investigation in relation to unexpected events happening in this hospital over a period of time, and as to what, in fact, the root cause or the causes of these are, and also an investigation as to how somebody can, in fact, be kind of accused of something which, once you begin to look at the case in any detail, like the conviction just does not stack up. And I suppose there are lessons to be learned in relation to, I suppose, the medical response to critical incidents and how they're investigated, and the avoidance of knee-jerk responses, kind of witch hunts, how biostatistics and biostatistical expertise should be used. Also, I suppose the what expertise do police services have when while investigating criminal activities in hospitals, which like police have training in relation to sensitive investigations. I don't know if there is training available in how to investigate a crime that may have been committed in a hospital. And how do you distinguish that from things that happen in hospitals anyway, as a result of natural death, as a result of maybe kind of negligent care? That is an area that needs to be looked at. The legal response, because I think the implications of this case would be profound in how medical experts are employed by the courts. I think Glyn Matthews, the Casey I alluded to previously, had mentioned, the fact that, this adversarial system, doesn't necessarily work to the benefit of justice. And perhaps, there is a strong argument to be made for expert witnesses to be appointed by the court. So they are not although they are independent, I think, when they are pitched one against the other, subconsciously they may feel to be on one side or other. So, and that is something that may emerge out of the case. But also how lay juries, are able to digest very complex information. And I think the role of the judge in moderating that, and also in advising, instructing, in running the case so that the jury kind of are given the information in a balanced way in order to serve justice. So I think there's a huge responsibility on justice in very technical cases to be able to somehow direct the conduct of the case in the best possible manner in order to basically achieve justice. And finally, I would say, Chris, like, there is an onus on doctors, on neonatal nurses, on midwives, on healthcare practitioners to put up their hand and say, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. I made an error of judgment. This, and that happens, that somebody kind of makes the wrong clinical diagnosis, gives the wrong dose of a medication, and may have very serious outcome. But you're kind of, part of your training is to take on board that responsibility, and it is difficult to do emotionally, but it is necessary. I think there is the same onus on the legal system when something has gone wrong, And to me, this has this has blatantly gone wrong. It is grossly gone wrong. There is an onus to put up your hand and say, look, we made a mistake. And I know that, the way things are at the moment, the system is now that the case would kind of need to be probably retried. But in the interests of everybody, and I think the interests of obviously the families as well, and the bereaved parents, the interest, and perhaps it's something that they don't emotionally want, but I suppose in the long term, and I don't want to seem in any way patronizing, to have it is preferable not to have the wrong answer in relation to what happened. And also the thought that somebody purposely killed your baby, I think to me is something horrific to try and countenance. For the person themselves, without a question of doubt, for their family, and also for the general public. Like there is a very significant interest in this, and also a confidence issue in relation to the judiciary and the legal services within the country, that if something kind of goes wrong and goes badly wrong, that we don't have to wait for an interminable period of time. Like I remember the Guildford Four and the Birmingham Six, and the advocacy of Chris Mullen and Gareth Pearson that went on for years and years and years, and that will be cruelty on top of what has already happened, for that to unfold like that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the obstetric aspects of the case. So I don't know how familiar you are with this, but there's almost practically zero obstetric or
Yeah,
maternity input in this court case.
yeah.
And Dr. Evans hand waves the idea that there should be. We know this from police documents now. So can you just firstly explain, the kind of relationship between neonatology and obstetrics, and why this is important, and why it would have been important in the court case?
Well, I like in any hospital review of a perinatal adverse outcome, perinatal morbidity, perinatal mortality, uh, relating to, I suppose, the outcome of a baby at or shortly after birth, it is mandatory for obstetricians and neonatologists, midwives, and where necessary, perinatal pathologists to discuss the case together. Because as I said, when the baby arrives, on the labor ward or in the neonatal intensive care unit, there's a prelude to that. And these babies were, these were high risk babies, premature babies, etc., small babies, babies where there were like multiple pregnancies, pregnancies complicated by hypertension. We mentioned antiphospholipid syndrome. So it is, in order to understand what happens to a baby, its clinical course after delivery, it is necessary to understand what condition the baby was in prior to birth. And I think that supplementary information would be of value in explaining, okay, some of the clinical courses of the babies. And in fact, it's the second conclusion point that Dr. Shu Lee makes in the independent review panel make in relation to these cases, that there was kind of a paucity of obstetrical information. So the clues to what happened are often in the labor and also what happened beforehand, and also if there were deficiencies in care that may somehow be responsible for what happened. It's not all on the shoulders of the neonatologist. There may be issues in relation to how, and we mentioned the case of the antibiotics in the context of prolonged ruptured membranes. But I think to get the full picture, and what you need in relation to these babies is the full picture. And it goes back to maybe what the judge says: you don't need to bother yourself with some of the precise details. You do need to bother yourself with the precise details, and it needs to be more comprehensive than it is. So I would imagine if this case is retried, that there will be obstetrical expertise who will cast a light on some of the issues that emerged kind of during the clinical course of these babies that may help explain what happened to them. Uh, and I suppose also for those babies that had postmortems as well, the input of the perinatal pathologist is crucial. And as I said, in any hospital evaluation of a critical incident, any ongoing audit in relation to mortality, morbidity, all of the caregivers and all of the investigators in any particular case come together in order to, I suppose, to have a comprehensive understanding of the case. So it is a deficiency in the trial that none of this happened. And one would wonder, just in relation to the hospital itself, in how at the time that these babies kind of collapsed or died, what level of multidisciplinary investigation actually happened? Because all hospitals audit their outcomes, they report their outcomes, and it is certainly in this country kind of necessary to have very frequent, like monthly perinatal morbidity and mortality meetings in order to discuss these cases. So one would wonder, what investigations actually took place ab initio. But anyway, so the obstetric element is very important in relation to this, and we would hope that will be redressed. And I imagine that, given I suppose what I believe is a very comprehensive defence that has been prepared in relation to this, that will be part of it. I just, in relation to, I suppose, going back maybe to the independent review, the one thing that quite impressed me was the fact that this was not a review undertaken to exonerate or to confirm the conviction. It was to basically look at causation, and also there was an obligation from the outset to actually release the information into the public, which was, I think, really important, irrespective of the outcome or the findings, which could not really be prejudged before this independent review took place. So that, to me, was a very kind of a very robust methodology to somehow gain a kind of a more comprehensive understanding of what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Child D. You've already spoken quite a bit about this and the relevance of obstetrics and antibiotics,
Yeah.
but I think more broadly you have a view on sepsis and the rashes and discoloration that was cited very differently in the court case.
Yeah. Well, I think the rash as relationship to embolization was highlighted, and this was considered to be kind of a very significant factor in establishing kind of a cause, and also a deliberate cause. But it's well cited in the literature that mottling of the skin, kind of occurs in hypoxia and sepsis. Okay, and they are kind of interrelated in that poor tissue perfusion, acidosis, kind of low oxygen levels, and infection together may cause that clinical sign. So it is explainable by those kind of clinical etiologies, rather than kind of recourse to the embolization theory. And I suppose the issue when it comes to like embolization, whether it's the injection of air into the circulation, or even injection into, which is different, into the stomach, or kind of the injection of insulin into infusion bags. In a neonatal intensive care, in the environment of a neonatal intensive care unit, where everybody is watching what's happening, right? It will be very difficult to actually kind of repeatedly kind of do things without somehow drawing attention to them. And I suppose the second thing is, which re-emphasizes, I suppose the I suppose maybe the innocence to me of this person is that nobody ever saw Lucy Letby do anything wrong. Okay, they didn't see her injecting insulin. They didn't see her injecting air. They didn't see her, doing anything untoward. Not alone in the 17 cases that went to trial, but also in the 4,000 cases that nobody actually saw her do anything wrong. So, so I, it kind of, I suppose, defies reason that when nobody sees anything do anything wrong, that there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for the outcome of these babies, tragic as it is, that there is a reasonable explanation in terms of sepsis and hypoxia for even the skin mottling, which I think was overemphasized or over dramatized as a clinical finding or as its significance, and used to support an alternative theory, which I don't think stacks up at all. That it just beggars belief that in fact we ended up where we did in relation to a conviction.
Actually, one of the things we've discussed is how these infants have very specific clinical signs, whereas in the court case, the injection of air and the introduction of air is a unifying factor. It's essentially cited as the reason for collapse in virtually every infant on which Lucy Letby is convicted, apart from the insulin cases that we'll discuss shortly. I mean, essentially, that's kind of laughable, isn't it? I don't know if is laughable the right word. Preposterous, ludicrous.
Well, well, I don't want to second guess the motivation and the thinking process of the expert witnesses who came up with this theory. Okay, but one would expect that in a court case that would have been basically debunked by a range of experts who would show that in fact the assumption made was in fact erroneous. Okay, yes. I think there was also kind of a group think that pertained to this case, and there was kind of a one-track mind. So the cause, like the evidence being given seemed to be just going down one continuous track. Okay, and everything kind of fed into that. So and an inability to kind of to break out of that mindset, and that kind of groupthink, or that locked into a particular viewpoint, whether it's in relation to the causation, but also, as I referred to earlier on, the comment made by the pediatrician that I've got this kind of tiny feeling of guilt that somebody else did it. So if you get locked into thinking this is the cause, or these are the causes, and you exclude everything else, and then you think that somebody deliberately did something, and if it's not that person, well, then it must be somebody else. I suppose it just shows how, in fact, this, I suppose, it's kind of a locked-in syndrome in relation to how the thought process is kind of actually kind of emerged and solidified in relation to this case.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's discuss the insulin cases, because I think you believe that there could potentially be obstetric factors.
Well, I think the obstetric factors are maybe just supplementary factors. That's all. Like, I think that it maybe put the baby at risk, but not. I don't think that would be the major contributory factor. I think, like, there's a commentary made in relation to baby being kind of borderline growth intrauterine growth retardation, that would increase the risk of hypoglycemia, but not of profound hypoglycemia. I think the issue in terms of hypoglycemia were, in fact, there was, from what I read in the independent review, there was a kind of a mismanagement of hypoglycemia, and also that the evidence given in relation to the use of exogenous insulin, that first of all, that the normative values in relation to insulin and C peptide, etc., are different in neonates, and also that kind of a reference laboratory was not used for second testing of samples, etc. So I'm not a biochemical expert. I think the why a baby should become hypoglycemic may have a pregnancy or intrapartum related cause, but the management of hypoglycemia is like part and parcel of everyday neonatal care. There seems to have been kind of problems in relation to the management of that, as there was also apparently a problem in relation to the management of an intubation. And I suppose this is emphasizes, I suppose, the commentary made, the conclusion made by the expert panel review that that the causes of death and collapse related to natural causes and also suboptimal care. It would appear from what the independent review reported on or concluded, rather than a traumatic or a dislodgement of an endotracheal tube, that in fact there was a difficulty with endotracheal intubation, and a tube of the wrong size was used, and also there were an absence of basic knowledge in relation to resuscitation practices. So I would think that perhaps they are the more likely etiologies of those particular issues.
Yeah, and with regard to this, do you think you mentioned some suboptimal practice in particular? Do you think?
Sorry, yeah, it's breaking up there, Chris, a bit.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, better now. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, with regard to what you've just said, you cited some suboptimal practice. So do you think understaffing and skill sets on the unit could have been a
Yeah.
contributing factor to outcomes?
I go back to, I suppose, the report made by the Royal College that visited, said that basically staffing levels were suboptimal, as they are in many units. I think they made that comment as well. I suppose why it should happen in one unit and not in another. I think there was a confluence of things that came together. The the fact that only one of the seven pediatricians had specific neonatal training, and they were looking after babies with highly complex needs, I think it is certainly an issue. Like it was they were taking babies at 27 weeks plus at the stage of the cases that are part of the trial. Kind of very small babies, highly complex needs, and only one of the pediatricians was actually had training in neonatology. So I think that is a factor. I think it was said in the Netflix documentary that not all of the nurses were actually specifically neonatally trained as well, and Lucy Letby actually was. That also is an issue. There are references made to teamwork, okay, by the independent review. So like if there is a deficiency in staff numbers, a deficiency in skill mix, if also there is an absence of teamwork. A comment was made by the Royal College that reluctance to ask for support, and maybe then a reluctance to give support, maybe a reluctance of expertise. There is another case which is referred to in the New Yorker article about a baby which is kind of outwith of these cases with hemophilia that was born in the same hospital some time, I think, prior to the events, who required to have factor given, which they hadn't got in the hospital, and also to be intubated. And there was a failure to intubate by two anesthetists, and somebody had to come from another hospital at a distance to provide the factor for the baby for hemophilia and also to successfully intubate the baby that required intubation. So certainly it would appear that there were deficiencies, and I suppose the fact that the mortality rate fell after Lucy Letby was actually taken out of service, but also coincident with the fact that they changed their admission criteria. I suppose the latter, I think, reflects maybe the reason for the improvement in outcome. So the hospital, and also would appear that perhaps that it's obviously women with babies with complex needs, and babies with complex needs need to be transferred to hospitals that can provide the full range of expertise. It may be also that these hospitals could actually accommodate uh, those babies or those mothers. So it's one thing saying that it's always necessary to transfer babies out, mothers out. There are issues in terms of responsibility or the resources in bigger hospitals being able to accommodate those. So I imagine both issues may be at play, but certainly the hospital seemed to be struggling as a consequence of workload, expertise, compounded by perhaps dysfunctional relationships, which have been alluded to also in the interview. So why these things didn't happen in one hospital and that happened in another, I suppose, like the Gorgonzola effect, everything lined up in the context of these particular cases and the other cases of unexplained collapse. And I think when basically the dust settles and an inquiry is held into unexplained or unexpected outcomes in this hospital over a wider period of time, themes will emerge and issues will emerge that will give a greater understanding as to why such things happened. And also, I suppose, the preventative steps that need to be taken to prevent them happening again.
Absolutely. Um, let's talk about the case of Child O. I know you spoke earlier about the kind of traumatic delivery, and there are other potential obstetric issues that could be important. So could you expand on that, please?
Well, I think there was a reference to a baby with a subcapsular hematoma, a significant subcapsular hematoma, and it was the review of the panel that this was caused. That this could not have been caused by any type of direct trauma to a thorax or to an abdomen, but was most probably caused by delivery. Now, this is where the circumstances, the obstetrical input would be very valuable, like to look at the cesarean section notes. These were triplets being born by cesarean section. What in fact happened? Was there difficulty at extraction? It'd be very unusual to have a traumatic injury at the time of cesarean section, but it can happen. So this is why I suppose that type of information, which is missing from certainly the narratives that I have read, will be actually crucial. And it is quite astounding that something like that was not, in fact, addressed in court. That type of evidence and was not made available. So once again, I suppose to understand the totality of these cases, it is necessary in newborns to actually look at intrapartum events and also the course of the pregnancy, kind of as to clues as to or an explanation as to why a baby collapsed or why a baby died. But not to do that is in fact, it's kind of an error, a gross error of judgment not to look at intrapartum and pregnancy related events in relation to neonatal outcome.
Absolutely. So I know that looking at this panoramically, you believe that the acuity of the infants that were dealt with during this period is significant, and also the number of multiple births. So could you discuss that, please?
Well, as I said before, like the the this hospital was looking after kind of high risk mothers, high risk babies, uh, without, I suppose, the level of neonatal expertise that you would expect, and also, as I mentioned before, in an atmosphere that was not necessarily conducive towards teamwork, and so beyond that, like I don't think there's anything further I can say, uh, other than perhaps the right decision was taken for the wrong reasons to actually like the right decision was taken in relation to restricting admissions, uh, precipitated by not by adverse events that happen perhaps due to suboptimal care, or but by by the involvement, or by the suspicion that somebody was actually harming these babies. So that actually precipitated the decision to actually restrict admissions, and also to restrict them to a particular gestation, which was the correct clinical decision, but precipitated by, I suppose, looking at the events perhaps the wrong way.
Okay. With that in mind, should some or perhaps even many of these infants have been born on a tertiary unit, a level 3 unit?
Well, yeah, they should be born in in an environment that has the right neonatal expertise. So certainly, like babies of 27 weeks gestation plus should be looked after by, at that gestation, should be looked after uh, by pediatricians who have subspecialist training in neonatology, because the requirements are very specific. And I'm not certain as to kind of the division of labor, or the division of duties amongst the pediatricians. But I imagine that these pediatricians were looking after older children as well, who were kind of coming into the hospital, etc. So that I suppose balance of clinical responsibility between very tiny babies in an ICU and then older children, it's a that's something that is kind of inappropriate in relation to providing optimal clinical care. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. In your one of your Irish Time articles for the Irish Times, you write that there are important clinical lessons to be learned from the Lucy Letby case, particularly for smaller units struggling to look after complex patients who should be referred to bigger units. Can you possibly explain that further?
Yeah, I think that it's uh, there's an onus of responsibility on, I suppose, the healthcare services to ensure that women with high risk pregnancies and vulnerable babies are looked after in the most appropriate centre. And one a woman may be attending kind of a smaller hospital with a normal pregnancy, and then suddenly develop a significant condition, or become or be at high risk of going into premature labor, etc., or have kind of high multiple pregnancy, high order of multiple pregnancy, that there should be obviously the opportunity to transfer these women to hospitals that can actually cater and provide the optimal care. It's also, I suppose, the issue that those hospitals need also have the capacity to actually accept those referrals. So it's a responsibility to, or the necessity to transfer out, and also the ability to accept transfers. So, but one would always want that a baby is delivered preferably on site, on the site of the optimum neonatal services. So, and like an in utero transfer is obviously preferable to a kind of neonatal transfer in this kind of context. So, yeah, I think it's important just in relation to how the system is managed, that there is that inbuilt capacity to transfer out and to accept transfers in.
Hmm. And then similarly, you also wrote in the Irish Times on the importance of healthcare systems being able to interpret and respond adequately to clusters of deaths. This is really important because the thermal inquiry is going to theoretically make recommendations on this if they ever actually decide that they've got the courage to do that. They're pushing it back and back and back, so maybe they won't. But theoretically, they're going to publish recommendations on this. So Could you kind of give me your thoughts on this
Yeah,
topic?
well, I think it's like it's part and parcel of training, certainly in this country, uh, for clinicians to have expertise in the in investigating kind of critical incidents. And all hospitals, I presume it's the same in UK, will have clinical risk departments with very specialist staff who are able to undertake critical incident reviews. So, like if there is a cluster of cases, or for individual cases, like when there is an adverse outcome, it is mandatory to investigate the cause, and that should be done in a multidisciplinary context. It's also important to undertake audit on an ongoing basis so that there is constant monitoring of performance and activity. Uh, Very important, I said, that it's multidisciplinary, that everyone has an input into it. Also, that there is, and also when there is a clustering of events, then to 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 have the ability to investigate that, and also because clustering most commonly occurs because of kind of a random concurrence. Okay, so clinical incidents don't happen necessarily at regular intervals. So in terms of a the maybe critical incidents in a hospital over a course of a year, they don't happen methodically at regular intervals. So you may have a clustering, and there may be no reason for that clustering other than the fact that these events actually happened at this time. Uh, and there may be then a long period of time when in fact nothing happens untoward. And then if you look at that a time frame over a course of 6 months or a year, that what has happened within that time frame is no different than what happened in similar time frames. But it is I suppose necessary to have for clinicians and also for clinical directors and those responsibility to have the necessary professional training to actually undertake these investigations, and not, I suppose, to
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
I suppose, yeah, like it's necessary to avoid kind of reflex responses,
yeah.
kind of witch hunts, knee-jerk reactions to, because in I suppose it is my experience that 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 most adverse events have a multifactorial etiology, and to be able to actually kind of work that out needs, first of all, clinical experience to do so, and also a professional training. I also think, and I'm very much taken by, I suppose, the uh, the commentary by biostatisticians, because I think they are underutilized in circumstances such as this, so that what one feels is statistically significant, perhaps on a very naive analysis, uh, and that bringing somebody in who has that type of expertise, and looking at patterns and trends, and comparisons between time frames, etc. Uh, that is something I think that is very valuable and has proved very valuable before, and also not alone in the context of a hospital looking at clustering, but also if in the event of something happening like what has happened in the Lucy Letby case, for somebody to actually, like the absence of statistical uh, expertise in the trial is another great deficiency, given, I suppose, the fact that a month beforehand, the Royal Statistical Society did actually publish a commentary on serial killers and healthcare killers, and alluded to two cases which are very similar in terms of the stats to Lucy Letby and actually provided that information to both the prosecution and to the defense, it you know it kind of beggars belief that that somebody did not in fact employ the services of a biostatistician to look at a very crudely drawn chart of who's on duty versus what events actually happened. So one would like to see one would like to have maybe the expert of biostatisticians into kind of a response to what, like, I think that when all this settles down, there will be an investigation as to how these things actually happened. And part of this will be what expertise do we need to investigate clusters that happen in hospitals,
Yeah. So I kind of got a couple of follow-up questions in relation to that. So you obviously mentioned the importance of there being a multidisciplinary aspect to
Yeah.
this. So that was really lacking from the police investigation. It's often sort of said that there were other experts in court, but firstly, they basically made the decision to arrest Lucy based on the work of one expert, firstly. And then secondly, the other experts really play a very minimal role in the court case. So really the obvious follow-up question is, should there have been a multidisciplinary investigation from day one?
Well, like, I don't know what happened in the hospital, but there certainly should have been a multidisciplinary investigation in the hospital, because if the police were somehow called to, because, like, if I don't know what access the police had to records within the hospital, but if there had been a multidisciplinary investigation at the time, and that was robust, I think any suspicion that anything untoward could have been, I suppose, kind of responded to, or could have been answered by virtue of the fact that if somebody contacted me today, like, I think somebody's actually killing babies here, and then in fact there was in fact a track record of multidisciplinary kind of investigations into critical events in the hospital, where they can actually say, well, look, these are what we found. Now, what expertise do? And I was looking at the police who are interrogating Lucy Letby, like, what expertise have they at the point of interview to actually interrogate her in relation to her clinical practice? It seemed to me that, like, I don't think at those interviews that they had any medical experts. So you have police with no medical expertise questioning a neonatal nurse in relation to her neonatal practice. So it's a very kind of unbalanced type of interview, and I can only imagine that if you do not have some type of training as a police investigator, as a detective, or whatever, in relation to what actually happens in hospitals, and what are natural events, and what is negligent care, etc., that you would be kind of, I suppose, kind of drawn to make assumptions that really do not kind of stack up in reality. So yeah, but the trial itself, like, the having like having an expert witness who, I suppose, kind of had a very fixed view of things, who also appeared to have changed his mind in relation to etiology a couple of times, and to have a judge who says, actually, you don't have to kind of worry yourself. You don't have to be kind of fully confident of the actually precise, like, to say that you don't have to actually you don't have to be kind of fully satisfied with the precise act, presumes that in fact the babies were deliberately attacked. It makes that presumption. You don't have to worry about it, because in fact, but you do need to worry about it. You do need to worry about the methodology. So yeah, it was. I think it will be a kind of a court case that will probably be the antithesis of an exemplar case for students of criminal law for generations to come,
I
unfortunately.
agree. I agree. I think what is so damning about that instruction that you mentioned is that, let's say you didn't look at any of the individual evidence. Let's say someone just told you as an outsider, right, there was a court case and there was 10 months of evidence. Do you think there's anything in this or not? Or do you think it's completely all this is completely baseless? you would tend towards thinking there's probably something in it. It's only when you look at the quality of that evidence that you realize how poor it is. And I think this was used as a method to by the prosecution. I've described it as like a no smoke without fire strategy, basically, of like we'll just bombard them with evidence. We use the term
Yes.
loosely until they just think, oh well, there's no smoke without fire here. And then for the judge to tell them, well, you don't even need to be certain of why this has happened, I think is extraordinary.
The other comment was made in the Rachel Aviv article, and I'm just reporting what she wrote, that that somebody made email contact with the judge, to say that they overheard a conversation amongst the jury that basically they'd made up their mind from kind of early on as to who was actually, in relation to what actually had happened. So yeah, it yeah, there are so many holes. There are so many holes in the case, that in fact, if you were to rerun it again, which hopefully it will, like to me, it's it's a slam dunk in relation to the fact that Lucy Letby did not actually try to kill these babies or kill these babies. It is so blatantly obvious that the circumstantial evidence doesn't stack up at all, and actually the scientific evidence doesn't stack up at all. So it's only a pity that this can't go to the Home Secretary, and for like it did, I think, in the case of the Birmingham Six and for the Guildford Four, and to say like this is kind of an unsound conviction. The the necessity to rerun the case really does not exist, because it kind of assumes that in fact there is a crime. Like there's no crime, there's no case. Uh, Perhaps for the optics of it, it will need to be run. But I think that I would predict that the case will collapse very shortly after it commences,
Mm.
uh, because of the overwhelming evidence against the conviction.
I mean, we have discussed this on this channel, and people say things in the comments, and I do think it's such a real balancing act because there is the optical need, as you described, the public requirement to retry this case, but then the practical reality of trying to do that when they don't have a case now, is going to make it extremely difficult because the statistics are dead. They're dead in the water, so they can't use that anymore. The anecdotal evidence is just rubbish, so they can't use that anymore. They're struggling for experts. They're desperately struggling for experts, and the caliber of the experts they've got compared to the 31 they're going to be up against them.
Well, I think yeah, I know the optics, and there's a trauma in running the case again. I think for parents and also for the person involved in the family, etc. But perhaps the collapse of the trial, shortly after beginning, will in fact, I suppose it will be the drama that would be necessary to convince, I suppose, the public that in fact kind of a great injustice is being done, uh, and um, uh, and yeah, I suppose it's, and also that justice will seem to have been done as well by actually attempting to retry the case. But it is, yeah, the whole thing is kind of totally regrettable, that it ever happened.
Oh, well, just bear with me. Just get a second. Yeah, so where were we? We're discussing the
Yeah, the necessity to retry the case.
yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah. So I think I do wonder whether whether the CPS will be able to put a case in court. Um, I don't know what they would say. I don't know what experts they would get. Dr. Evans can't do it. If they claim different methods of murder or different methods of that's going to look
yes,
utterly ridiculous.
yes,
Who
yes,
the hell is going to go in there and say,
yes.
"Oh, it was air, not a bowel obstruction," or
Yeah, I wonder, is it that eventuality that is actually delaying, because delaying the review that's undergoing at the present time as to know what actually happens to like. So their mandate is to refer it back to the Court of Appeal, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's inevitable. It just
yeah,
needs to happen quickly now, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's interesting also I suppose the political response to it as well, and I suppose and the media response because it has come from uh, a surprising quarters as well, uh, in relation to David Davis and Jeremy Hunt, uh, whom I would not necessarily have imagined would have been the champions for Lucy Letby, and politically there are people I would not necessarily have much in common with, but so it's been very interesting to see, and I must say their arguments have been very cogent, uh, and uh, and they've been kind of early out in relation to, I suppose, kind of championing the cause, and I suppose to see also across the media, from the kind of from the right wing press and from the left wing press, there has been actually kind of a unanimity in relation to the unsoundness of the verdict, which is something you don't commonly see, you know. So that's been very interesting, and so it's and I suppose it emphasizes kind of how obvious the miscarriage of justice has been. Uh,
I mean, everything is pointing to innocence, isn't it?
Everything is point. Yes, yes. So I initially I suppose when I wrote the article in 25, I was kind of cautious. I was saying like that,
Mm.
that basically that there are reasons to believe that she may be innocent. I would be 100% certain that she is innocent in relation to this, and there is not one thread of evidence, scientific, medical, laboratory, circumstantial, that actually kind of holds water, and that is unusual, I think, in relation to unsafe convictions. That basically every argument is very easily dismantleable, uh, which I suppose necessitates the need to do it quickly rather than to prolong the agony for everyone. And I suppose it is inevitable, I think, that that her innocence will be proven. It compounds everything, that if this is actually delayed. And I think there is, as I say, for for confidence in the British judicial system. When it gets things wrong, I think you should be confident that they can actually look to redress the balance, in a timely manner. Uh, to redress the error in a timely manner.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think that's a great place to leave our
Yeah.
discussion. I think I've
Okay.
covered every base that I wanted to. So really, really grateful for you joining us, and
Not
also
at all. Not
also
at
for
all.
writing in the Irish Times as well. It all
Okay.
helps the
Great.
case. So
Well, Sam, I look forward to reading the book, and I must say, I have to say, congratulations on writing that. This is not a free advertisement, but congratulations on writing the book. And I found it very interesting that your publisher is, in fact, the same publisher that published the book on the post office scandal, uh, which I suppose is evidence of the same one-track mind group think. You basically get an idea into your head in relation to guilt, and it becomes unshakable despite the fact that like everything screams out that this could not be and was not the case. So well done.
absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.